Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of To Be a Boy. It is absolutely delightful to have you all join us. We're really, really excited about this podcast. And what we want to do in this intro episode is just tell you a bit about who we are, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. So I'm going to hand over to my partner in crime, Elliott Ray. Elliott, tell us a bit about you.
Well, welcome, everybody. Episode 1. I feel like singing a song in celebration that we are here, but I'm not going to. We don't want people to turn off after 10 seconds of the podcast. So welcome, everybody. Episode 1 of To Be a Boy podcast. And this has been a long time coming, I think, not just for us, but I think for everybody in regards to having these conversations. And so I'm so excited about the things we're going to get into and the podcast. My name is Elliott Ray. I'm a husband, a dad of 2 girls. So there is all ladies in my household apart from me. My dog Jesse is a boy, but he's had the snip, so I don't know if that counts. But I'm a QPR fan. I love football and have been described as the most unserious, serious person you're ever going to meet. So I am deadly serious about my work. I am deadly passionate about making the world better, about these issues around men and boys and gender equality. But I just want to have a laugh most of the time. And Joeli, I think that's why we get on so well. I think we're kindred spirits in that way.
I would agree with all of that. Serious, deadly serious about my work, not serious about anything else.
That's the best way to live, definitely. So I think we can do things differently. The traditional idea of masculinity that we have been taught, I think, is killing us, literally. I believe that we need to raise boys and support men to embrace caregiving, to embrace help seeking, to prioritize male friendships, and prioritize well-being. And through my work, I promote those ideas and create spaces for men and dads to connect. So I have a culture change campaign called Parenting Out Loud, which is about dads being loud and proud about their caring responsibilities at work. You know, parenting out loud is essential to equal parenting, and equal parenting, of course, is really important for the well-being of both parents, for the motherhood penalty, for the gender pay gap. I'm also the founder of Music Football Fatherhood, which is a platform that creates open conversations for men through our online group therapy, through our really cool partnerships in football stadiums with football clubs. I'm the creator of a book called Dad, and done some things on TV, including the seminal show called Becoming Dad on BBC One. Joeli, who are you?
Who am I? I would call you, Elliott, an expert in men and fatherhood, and I would say I still don't feel comfortable with calling myself an expert in anything apart from parallel parking. I'm really good at parallel parking, but I am a mother of 2 boys who are now aged 9 and 11. And, you know, just to keep it real, one of them is currently off school sick and sitting in a corner playing on computer games. And I founded the charity and campaign group Pregnant Then Screwed. So I've spent the last 10 years working with women and trying to help women when they've experienced discrimination or disadvantage at work. So, you know, I would describe myself as a feminist, a very passionate feminist who's worked in women's rights for the last 10 years. And the reason why I care about this conversation so much is, if I'm honest, predominantly because I have 2 boys who I'm trying to raise and trying to figure out how to raise them to be healthy, happy, good human beings. But also because I can see quite clearly that unless we have this conversation about men and boys, and unless we start to understand where we're going wrong, then many of the challenges that women are experiencing will not be solved. So that's why I'm here. I've been very excited about having this conversation for a very, very long time. And I'm really grateful to be doing it with you, Elliott Ray.
Oh, thank you, Joeli. Making my heart all warm. You can make me blush if I can. I can't, but you would make me blush if I could.
You can't blush.
I can't. No. Yes. I want to shout out our supporters. Should we shout out our supporters? Thank you so much to Bubble, who are the flexible childcare providers for people like us with busy lives with childcare responsibilities. Bubble are amazing, so more to come on them later. And our supporters are
Movember, who many of you will have heard of, and many of you may have grown a moustache to support in the month of November. And they campaign for men's mental and physical health. They're an incredible, incredible charity, and we're really, really delighted to be working with them on our podcast. So thank you, Movember, and thank you, Bubble.
Thank you. So, Joeli, tell us more about why this podcast is important to you. You know, you've done incredible work with Pregnant Then Screwed. Amazing work. You know, changed the world for working mums and working parents. Tell us about this podcast. Why is it important to your work and to you personally?
I am really disturbed by some of the narrative, public narrative and discourse when it comes to men and boys. And actually, had I not given birth to two boys, I don't think I would think about this stuff as much as I do. But when we've been through the Me Too movement, when we've had these really open conversations about sexism and sexual assault and harassment, to then stare into the faces of my sweet, cherubic, beautiful boys and think, you will grow into a man. You could be somebody potentially who could end up doing this to other women, but you're also you're going to be a white man, right? You're going to be the person that at the moment holds the most power, and I worry as a mother that I am firstly not giving them the tools that they need in order to navigate this very complex and new world. But I also worry about the messaging that they're getting publicly. I feel like on the right, it's that white men are going to save everything, that they're the answer to everything, and that don't you dare say anything negative about masculinity. And on the left, it's very much masculinity is toxic. And there seems to be nothing in between that. There seems to be no conversation that enables boys to be more emotional. I think that is something that's very much missing from the conversation. But also, you know, we're saying to girls, you can do anything. You can be powerful. You can be computer programmers. You can be engineers. We're not saying to boys, you can be nurses. You can be stay-at-home parents. You can be fashion designers. You know, we are having a very one-sided conversation at the moment. And until that conversation flips and we start having this better conversation about boys, I feel like we're never going to succeed. Any of us are never going to succeed. And of course, there are the likes of the masculinity influencers and the current political representation that we've got, that I feel things could actually get worse, not better, over the coming years. And so I hope this podcast can be a counter narrative to some of the stuff that we're seeing play out in the UK and internationally. What about you, Elliott?
So why am I doing this podcast? Well, I think when Joeli Brearley asks you to do something, you just say yes, basically. You know, when you're younger and your mum and dad say to you, if your friend jumps off a cliff, are you going to jump off a cliff? And I'll be like, if it's Joeli, then yes. I'm only half joking about that. The other reason why I'm doing this, I've seen what you're saying there. I've seen what happens when we don't raise boys to be empathetic, to prioritize their well-being, to look outside of the traditional ideas of what success has been defined for us. So I'll never forget doing a talk at a company a couple of years ago, and there were a panel of dads, and there was one very, very senior man. So this was with a telecommunications company, one of the big ones. So you can narrow it down. They probably provide your broadband, and he was the CFO or something like that. The guy was in his 60s, and he had two children. They were grown up in their 30s. One lived in Paris and one lived near him in the Midlands. And he was a very successful man. He had the cars, the status, the salary, the positional power. He had everything that you would define as success. And he said in his own words, when his children were young, he missed out on the school run, on the nursery drop-off, the swimming lessons on a Friday, the Saturday morning park visits. He was around, but often he was away working. So I think what we hope to do as parents is, pour into our children when they are younger, with the hope that our children will get older and come back to us, and the relationship develops and change, but they come back to us and we have a strong relationship with our adult children. But he said in his own words that his children never came back to him when there is a problem in the family with his children. They don't ring him, they ring their mum. When they have something to celebrate, some news, they ring their mum, his wife. And around the dinner table at Christmas, there's distance between him and his kids. He was never able to actually rekindle the relationship or even form a relationship. And he said he regretted that he didn't have the opportunity to have this conversation 30, 40 years ago. The conversation where, yes, he could still be a super involved in his work, but actually work a little bit more flexibly. He could make the school pick up once or twice a week. He could make the swimming lessons. He could be around for the park visits on a Saturday. And his children never came back to him. And I think that was such a powerful story for everyone in the room and for me. And we know that the most important thing is relationships, is connection. And I think at the moment, this quite narrow idea of what it means to be successful as a man doesn't include the most valuable thing to us. And so I think with this podcast, it's about how do we offer an alternative? How do we speak to the boys around us, our sons, our nephews? How do we support the men in our lives? How do we support ourselves to think more widely about what success means to us? How do we broaden the idea of who we can be? How do we take risks? How do we recognize that, yes, you can be stoic. There's a time and a space for that. There's a time and a space for getting your head down and doing what needs to be done. There's nothing wrong with being competitive, but at the same time, we need to have empathy. We need to think about caregiving. We need to be equal parents if we can. We need to embrace therapy. We need to prioritize our health and well-being and our friendships. And that is really, really important. It's not a nice to have. It is fundamental to our health, our well-being, our longevity. And, I've seen too many times men who seemingly have it all on the face of it. They've got the senior job. They have the success, but they drink alone on the weekend. They have been through loss and never spoken to anyone about it. They're going through a divorce and have no friends to turn to. And this is a common occurrence in my work. And so I think it's really important that we have this conversation. It's never too late. Of course, we're going to be talking a lot about raising boys, but it's never too late. I don't think any age is too late to think differently about how we approach the world, how we see ourselves in the world, what we see as our priorities. So I really hope that everyone can listen to this podcast and hopefully get something from it. But in terms of achievements, what do you want the podcast to achieve, Joeli? What is it sounds so corporate, right? But
what's
what
your
is success to you?
KPIs for this podcast? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time with this
Where do you
podcast?
see yourself in 5 years?
I'm doing this, I'll be honest, for entirely selfish reasons. There is nothing altruistic about me doing this podcast. I'm doing it because I want to understand better how I can be a better parent to my boys. And I am at sea about how I navigate the modern day world with everything that is going on, and how I give them the tools and the support and the information that they need at the right time, so that they can think critically about what they're seeing and experiencing, but also so that they hopefully stay on the right path. So it comes from an entirely selfish place. But then again, so did Pregnant Then Screwed in a way. It came from a place of me getting pushed out of my job when I was pregnant and me being so furious I had to do something about it. And of course, I know that other parents will feel very similarly to me and very confused about how to raise their boys as well with everything that is going on and feel this complete sense of overwhelm. So I hope that this podcast helps people solve that to a degree. I mean, we're never going to completely solve it. I'm not saying you're going to listen to this podcast and suddenly you're going to be like the most perfect parent in the entire world. What does that even mean? Or, you're going to raise these immaculate boys. But I think just having some information, some insight and some tools, particularly for me as a woman who I haven't experienced being a boy. I had a sister as well. I didn't even, have a brother. So it's a very confusing world for me. And I think there are many other people in my position. What about you? What are your KPIs,
What are my
Elliott?
KPIs? What do I want to achieve? Where do I want to be? So for me, I think it's filling the void. And I've been doing lots of reading about the manosphere, about the profitability of these manosphere influencers that you may or may not have heard of. We're going to definitely get into it over the duration of the podcast. That is a thriving market. And a lot of those influencers are in there. Most of them, I would say, are in there for the wrong reasons. They're in there because it's money making, it's status raising, but the messaging is so harmful. It's so harmful, telling boys about what success looks like and their idea of this traditional man that's all conquering, all powerful, all earning. It's not realistic and it's not actually fit for purpose in the modern world. So I want us to fill the void, to help support parents, caregivers, just interested people, men, women, people who care about this, people who recognize that there is so much conversation work to do, and hopefully challenge perspectives. I want to have really difficult conversations. I think the reason why there hasn't been a podcast like this, a big mainstream one in the UK at least, is because the conversations are quite sensitive and challenging. And I think the reason, the why I'm so happy that we are doing this is because we're so different in a way, but we're so similar. You're a mum, you're white, you're from the north. I won't do a northern accent because I will get cancelled. Maybe
I'll do that for you.
Episode 10, maybe. If you listen to episode 10, I would break out my my Teesside accent, but not for now. But we are so different, right? I'm a man, I am black, I'm from London, I have daughters and a wife, but our aims in life are the same. And I think there's so many other people who are listening who have the same kind of worldview, but there's been a gap in regards to content and conversation for them to think about, how do you raise boys, or how do you support men, or how do you be a man or a boy in a healthy way that's going to help you have a great life, but also help the people around you to thrive as well. I want this to be intersectional. Race and class in this conversation, I think sometimes is missed out so much. And so that's going to be a theme. But ultimately, the core idea that this is not a zero-sum game, to support men is not taking away from the support of women. Actually, it's adding to it. If we're supporting men to be caregivers and be equal parents, that's key to the motherhood penalty. If we're supporting men to look after their health and well-being and their mental well-being, that's really, really good for society, for relationships, for partnerships, for marriages. And I think part of the reason why maybe people shy away from this conversation is when we talk about men and boys, there can be that backlash of, but wait a minute, men and boys have so much privilege, and a lot of the time they are the perpetrators for what's going on in the world, sometimes rightly or wrongly. So we don't talk about the challenges that men and boys have, but men and boys have loads of challenges. And we're not going to fix and improve gender equality for everybody unless we actually start to put some focus on some of those issues that men and boys face.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting, the conversation about the masculinity influences, and it sort of feels to me like they're filling a void, and what that void is partly what I want to unpick through this podcast.
So, Joeli, you and your partner are two full-time, busy working parents. And I know you don't have your parents close by or that village or the support nearby. How do you cope with all of this?
Well, the simple answer is we don't. We're both losing our marbles constantly. But thankfully, we did find Bubble childcare, and it's been a total game changer. We were really nervous about having a stranger come into our house, but we found Sarah. She's a primary school teacher who is doing some babysitting and nannying on the side. She came and met with us. The kids absolutely adore her. She is just brilliant. She babysat for us a couple of weeks ago, and she even made the kids their dinner. And now the kids just want us to go out all the time so that they can have Sarah. We've used her for emergency backup care. It's saved our relationship. It's saved our careers. We just love Bubble.
Find and book background checked nannies and sitters who can be with you in as little as an hour. Trusted by parents you know, like us. Search Bubble Childcare in the App Store or Google Play Store.
I would be interested to hear from you, Elliott, before we go down this road and have all these conversations, what you think it is to be a good man, because it sort of feels that lots of the things that I've read and heard people saying these masculinity influences are so popular because of this void of current modern day men not understanding their position or role in society, because that's changed and there's no new what's the right word? Well, KPI. There's no new thing to aim for, and no model for what it is to be a good man, or an effective man, shall we say, in the current day world. What would you say it is to be? What is masculine energy? Let's not talk about Mark Zuckerberg, but what would you say is masculine energy? What is it to be a man?
Yeah, so I always get, it's interesting when people say there are no models. I understand that because there probably aren't in regards to the public life and those men showing you how they live their life. At least not prominent figures to the scale of the Tates, Petersons, etc. But I look around in my life, I see good men everywhere. I see good men everywhere. My friends, my dad, so many of my family members, cousins, uncles, men I've worked with, like they're everywhere. We just don't really hear from them because they're too busy living. They're not online making podcasts. They don't have Instagram accounts, right? They're not like out here showcasing their good man lives. They're too busy doing the school pickup, swimming. They're too busy just like gardening. They're too busy doing their things. So what's a good man? A good man is someone who understands that they can be different things. It's a man who has integrity, who stands for something. It's someone who is open to listening and learning, understands they don't know everything about the world, about themselves, about their partner, about their kids. They are open-minded. They are teachable. They are respectful to other humans. They're polite. They will protect what's important to them. They will stand up for the people they love. They will make every effort to be kind. They will, at the same time, also stand up against disrespect, whether that's to them or people around them. They are thinking about the future for their family and themselves. They, as much as they can, try to live a healthy lifestyle, understanding that they are role modeling to the people around them, and also understanding that life is long and we want to be here in 30, 40 years. So we try our best to make good decisions. They are people who love hard, who don't take themselves too seriously, have a sense of humor. And when I'm saying this, I'm thinking about people I know.
Yeah.
These are people, I'm picturing people I know here. Yeah. This is not theory.
Yeah.
I don't want to say names because I will miss some people out, but I'm thinking about people. There are so many good men in the world, but they don't get the promotion. And I think it's sad that is the case. And, through this podcast, we can hopefully bring in some of those good men.
Yeah.
To share their stories, What about you? What do you think?
I hope we can bring in some of those good men. I think there are lots of women women and boys and men who don't have those good role models in their life, who haven't seen positive masculinity necessarily. I, as a woman, I've obviously experienced lots of sexism. I've experienced sexual assault. I have seen the dark side of masculinity very obviously. I had a relatively absent father who, he wasn't around very much at all. I felt like I barely knew him when I was younger. I've got to know him a lot more now that we're older. He and my mum split up when I was 18. It took a long time, but they did finally split up, which was the right thing for them. So I was really brought up by women entirely and didn't have those positive male role models in my life. And so that's partly why I am very fearful of getting this wrong with my boys, because it's sometimes hard for me to picture that the person that you have just described, Elliott. And I, of course, know brilliant men, and I love men. Like, there are lots of men in my life that I love and adore. But growing up, I just didn't have that role model. And so showcasing that, I think, as well, is partly what I'd like to see happen during this podcast. Seeing those positive examples of masculinity, because they do exist, and it's really important that they're seen. Should we talk about some of the data? Because I think that's really important to highlight why this conversation is so significant. I am really interested, for personal reasons, in the impact that pornography is having on children. And it's something that I am trying to navigate with my own boys at the moment, and having open conversations about sex, but also, without going into too much detail, my eldest child has seen pornography, and I found that really challenging, really, really difficult. We know from the data that 1 in 10 children have watched pornography by the time they are 9 years old, and 1/4 of pupils by the time they reach their final year of primary school have seen pornography, and much of the content is violent, aggressive content. And we both have heard some really horrific stories about what pornography is doing to children. I know the Children's Commissioner, Rachel D'Souza, said that in her time having conversations with young people about the impact porn's having, she spoke to a 12-year-old girl who had her first kiss with her first boyfriend, and he strangled her during the kiss. She's still alive. He didn't, but he thought that was how you did that. He thought that was perfectly normal. We have a kiss, I strangle you. That's how that goes. Stories like that are really devastating and really shocking. And we know that the number of boys and girls who now think sex needs to be violent and aggressive is increasing, particularly around things like asphyxiation. And that certainly terrifies me. And so I'm really keen to understand how we navigate that, because that was not something I needed to navigate when I was younger. Porn, when I was younger, was page 3. Like, it was a set of tits. Yeah. It was not active seeing that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it was a top
at a
shelf
young
in the
age.
newsagents. And I think through this podcast, one of the things that, I'm definitely in it for selfish reasons as well, is trying to understand, like, what does online safety look like? How can we get better at trying to make sure our child doesn't see the porn, but understanding that they probably will somewhere along the line, because it may not be their phone, it may be their friend's phone at school and whatnot. And being brave enough to have the conversation. How do we approach that conversation? What does that look like? And it's going to be at an age that's much younger than we're probably comfortable with. But that's the reality of the world now. And I think when it comes to young boys and their idea of what intimacy looks like and what a healthy relationship looks like, if that's being modeled by Pornhub and not through healthy conversation with an adult, then, we can see why they exhibit certain behaviors. So it's going to be tough, as parents, and hopefully through this podcast, we can help parents to navigate those kind of conversations.
Yeah, because as you say, it's not just porn, is it? It's all the stuff that you can access on the internet that can be really scary and really damaging. I watched the Emma Willis program about mobile phones in schools where they banned them. I can't remember what the program was called now, but you know what I'm talking about. And I watched it with my eldest, and at the end I said to him, what do you think we should do about this problem? And he said we should ban mobile phones before the age of 14, which I still think is an interesting proposition. But it's not going to happen anytime soon, is it? So in the meantime, we do need to understand better how to help children navigate this new world where they're living their life on the internet as well as accessing potentially harmful content regularly. Tell us about the data you're interested in.
So I think going, that idea about kids on their phones and kids spending so much time on games and gaming, and part of the I guess symptom of that is increased isolation. And we know that so many men and boys are experiencing loneliness. The ONS found that 20% of men have no close friends. So they may have, people that they chat to and they're cool with and whatnot, but close friends in regards to when shit hits the fan, when I'm going through a divorce, or when I'm being bullied at school, or when I've been diagnosed with a health condition, I have no one to talk to. I look around and there's no one. And recent research has shown us that people who are lonely are more likely to be stressed out. Their body will produce harmful proteins. They are more likely to suffer from cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, stroke. Lonely people are more likely to be anxious and depressed, suffer from suicidal ideation. And this is a massive issue, particularly around young boys and men. So how do we encourage boys to actually have healthy relationships with their friends and maintain that through adult life?
It's so important. It's so important. And I see it with my own kids as well, that when they connect through probably a screen. They, even if they're in the same room. And it does feel very different to looking at girls and the way they connect. So I'm really interested to have that conversation further and probe it and understand how we can help boys build and nurture better relationships, but also how we can help men do the same as well, because there are a lot, as you say, quite a lot more lonely men than women.
What data have we found around education? And talk to us about school.
Yeah, I mean, this is depressing stuff though, Elliott, but we need to lay out the problem so that we're able to fix it, aren't we? The data shows that in the UK, boys are now trailing behind girls at every level of schooling. And we know that in the last academic year, boys were twice as likely as girls to be permanently excluded and twice as likely to be suspended. That data is higher for black boys, is higher for boys who are from an Irish traveller background or gypsy background. but it's definitely higher as well overall for boys than it is for girls. 22% of boys are identified as having special educational needs compared to 12% of girls. So double the amount of boys are being identified as having SEN. 6% of boys have an education and healthcare plan in place compared to 2% of girls. The education and healthcare plan is what you get if your child has special educational needs, so that they can obviously put special provisions in place for you. Men are considerably less likely to progress to higher education than women, and they are more likely to drop out. Now, obviously, all of this changes after school. And so if men progress through higher education, once men and women both come out of that system and go into the workplace, men tend to earn a lot more and progress a lot faster. But it's really interesting to me that at the school level, girls are doing so much better than boys in every subject at every single level. So trying to understand why that is, what's causing that, I think is really, really important. Obviously, I've spent the last 10 years working on the other side of it, of the fact that when you go in the workplace, women are falling behind. So that conversation is also very important. I don't want to pretend it isn't. But it's just as important to me to understand what's happening with boys at school and why that's just not working for them in the way that it's working for girls.
Yeah, and there's so much conversation around, boys' brains developing in a slightly different way. The lack of male teachers in schools, maybe schools not changing their teaching techniques to actually suit boys' behavior and needs and desires at that age. And especially from a black boy, black man perspective, this is so important to me. I know young black boys that have been expelled from school, and you kind of look at it and think it's so sad they are judged for their behavior differently at a young age. That discrimination starts so early. And you think about life, and you think about if a child has had that experience, been expelled from school in primary school or year 7, what does that do for their chances?
Yeah.
How does that kind of dictate their life's journey? And so, so much conversation to be had around that.
The other data that I found really fascinating is that men make up the vast majority of the perpetrators of violence, but also of the victims. So they are more likely to experience violent crime as well as be the perpetrators of it. Now, of course, that's not to undermine domestic abuse, which of course is predominantly experienced by women. But there is a whole conversation here around male on male violence and a conversation about why men can be so violent compared to women, that I'm really interested to dig into as well, and how to deal with that. Raising 2 boys, they're very rambunctious, and it's all about everything suddenly becomes a gun, and you're like, well, how has this happened when you're trying to be as gender neutral as possible, and then they pick up a cushion and it becomes a gun. And they want to play games that involve guns, and there is this sort of natural gravitation towards, I don't want to say violence, that's the wrong word, but games that involve some level of either punching each other in the face or using some sort of weapons, and you don't see that as much from girls. So understanding that, I think, is also something I'd like to get.
Do they do wrestling moves off the sofa? That was me when I was younger. Friends
Constant.
over, jumping off the sofa. I must have driven my parents crazy.
Yeah.
Literally. I'm sorry, Mum and Dad. They're probably listening to this. I apologise. I found some really interesting data about mental health and suicide. I'm sure everyone listening, suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 50. 12 men take their own lives every day in the UK. 1 in 8 men are suffering from a mental health problem right now. And that's even worse for black men. Black men are more likely to experience symptoms of psychosis was 3.2% affected compared to 0.3% of white men and 1.3% of Asian men. And despite a higher prevalence of mental health issues, only 6% of black adults receive mental health treatment, the lowest rate among all ethnic groups. In the year ending March 2023, black individuals were 3.5 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act than white individuals. So, yeah, for men overall, like mental health and suicide is so serious, so serious. And through my work, I've walked into so many rooms where people are presenting as we are, as content, as happy, easygoing. And the assumption is that, you know, they're all good, they're fine, like life is okay. When we create the space for those men to actually like take off the mask, to let loose, to open up, and you find out they're going through some of the most devastating things that a human could go through, that they are suffering from or have suffered from very severe challenges. And you just start to understand that there are so many men like walking amongst us at work, in the supermarket, in our own families, maybe sleeping next to us, who are never going to tell anyone about their challenges. You know, they're never going to admit.
I think that's done that. You know, I always hear from boys and men that they prefer to have conversations looking ahead rather than face on. There are different ways of having conversations with boys and men, aren't there, that, to what girls and women are more used to. So I think it's really handy for the girls and women listening to think about other techniques of getting the men in their lives to open up. So we should tell people how they can engage with us as well, like how they can ask us questions, how they can get involved, because we do want this to not just be a broadcast, but to be an interactive, moving, live experience. So
yeah, we want a community. See how like Beyonce has the Beehive? I think we want something like that. We'll think of a name.
To be a boy hive?
To be a boyers, yeah, something like that. The name will come. It will come. But yeah, we want. This is a community. We want conversation. We want to hear from you. Your likely parents, boy mums, boy dads, girl dads, teachers, whatever. To be a boy team at gmail.com. To be a boy team at gmail.com. So send in your messages, voice notes. Are we accepting voice notes, Joeli?
Yeah, let's accept voice notes. Yeah, but don't make them too long.
Like 40 seconds is all right. But yeah, voice notes, questions, comments, suggestions. Maybe if there's a guest that you think we should get on, like anything really, just email us. Just email us.
Yeah, and what you thought about the last episode, we'd love to hear all of that as well. I think I am really excited about the next few interviews. We've got some incredible people coming up over the first season. We've got the brilliant Ruth Whitman, who is the author of Boy Mom. She's British, but she lives in America. Absolutely amazing book, absolutely incredible interview with her. We've got Alex Holmes, who is going to talk about how men think about love, belonging and connection. We've got Lenore Skenazy, who's going to talk about how to raise safe, self-reliant boys and is the author of Free Range Kids. We've got the wonderful future men, Owen Thomas and Chris Stein, who are going to talk about what it means to be a man. We've got Amy Lang talking about sex with boys. And we've got Max Dickens on why men have a friendship problem. And he wrote the book Billy No Mates, didn't he?
Amazing guests. Seriously, all of them have so much just good knowledge and perspectives and expertise. And so we are excited about you listening to them and our conversations. This podcast is going to be bi-weekly. So every other Tuesday, you're going to hear us in your ears. We're going to talk about current affairs, what's going on in the world. We're going to talk about what is going on for us that's relevant. Not just talking about my leafy root, stuff that's relevant to the conversation. Audience questions. So please submit your questions. And then we'll go on to our interview with our guests. So bi-weekly, every other Tuesday. To Be a Boy podcast will be on all of your providers and platforms where you access your podcasts.
So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this first introductory episode. I hope you are suitably excited about what's coming up. And thank you for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
See you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.